Sorry for the technical problems, and because of that, the program delayed, the webinar delayed for 8 to 10 minutes because some technical issues in my laptop. Uh, this is our monthly webinar. This time we have chosen a very clinical talk on shoulder examination, core concept and essential clinical skills. It will be presented by Dr. Harleen Uppal. She has already presented a beautiful presentation long back in August regarding musculoskeletal ultrasound in hamstring injuries. That was a very nice talk. And this special examination of the shoulder joint, really it will be very helpful for all the physiatrists as well as the PG students. Whenever we sit in OPD, when you see a shoulder pain or any shoulder pathology in a BG OPD, you have to have a good clinical acumen to differentiate whether the pain or the pathology is arising from the muscle or from labrum or from the bone. So by your different clinical test and your clinical acumen within the BGOPD, you can differentiate that whether the pain is originating from which structure. Accordingly you can plan your management strategy. So this time it will be presented by Dr. Harleen Uppal. We all know her. She has already presented in August, and she is her educational qualification. Has passed out her MD PMR from AIMS New Delhi. Also, she has done Commonwealth Fellow, uh, United UK, and Diploma Sports Medicine and International Olympic Committee. And she has more than 30 publications to his academic credential. And she has special interest on para sports medicine, musculoskeletal interventions, and ultrasound guided musculoskeletal interventions and neurorehabilitations. So, without much wasting our time, I would like to invite Dr. Harleen Utpal to present her talk on shoulder examination, core concept, and essential clinical skills. Thank you, madam, for accepting our invitation. Now the podium is for you all.
Thank you so much, sir. So I would be taking this talk, and actually I chose this topic because I think there are a uh, few things which we as physiatrists must be competitive enough and at par with the orthopedicians and the other clinicians. So, some of the shoulder tests which we usually miss, I will try to cover those as well. And for example, the stability tests, right? The because a lot not a lot of acute trauma comes to us. So most of the degenerative conditions and shoulder pains we see, we should also be competitive with the stability aspect. Then I would also cover the internal impingement, which is a recent concept, and the external impingement as well. So let's begin. And so I'm not going to cover the initial aspect like the inspection, palpation, movement. In movement, we will have the muscle testing and the range of motion. So that I will not cover because everybody, short timing is there. So we will try to cover the some tests which we all can quickly do. So you definitely have to do the initial part, the inspection, palpation. Palpation is also very important because you can actually localize the pathology to much greater extent. So if we come to the special tests, I have divided them into rotator cuff tests, then AC joint tests, labral tests, the stability tests, and the biceps tendon tests. And this will also cover the impingement test. The rotator cuff will cover impingement tests. And we will also, in the stability tests, we will also have the internal impingement concept. So, which is most commonly seen in a thrower. And then towards the end, the thoracic outlet syndrome, that also is a very common differential for a shoulder pain. So those tests should also be conducted. So you can just pick up one tests from each of these and maybe quickly do it in the busy OPD. So starting with the rotator cuff tests, first one is the most common test, which is the impingement sign. So there is impingement sign, then there is impingement test. So these two are different. Impingement sign was coined by, it was devised by Charles Neer. And what we do, we all know, we do a passive flexion of the pronated arm to maximal forward flexion, and while with the other hand we stabilize the scapula, right? And what happens in this? So we are basically bringing the rotator cuff and the glenoid below the acromion, and so the impingement, if it is there, will get provocated. So this is the impingement sign. And there is another modified Neer sign. So this is just for academic purpose, maybe in a quiz or in a viva, because if you can, in a busy OPD you can do just the Neer test, but you should know how to do the modified Neer sign as well. You flex the patient's elbow and internal rotation of the shoulder is done. So it is the same, just the difference is, like, you do the impingement sign, you have taken up uh, the shoulder to maximum forward flexion. So what you have done here is that you have also flexed the patient's elbow. Just look at the picture in the uh, on the slide, and you see that the patient's elbow is flexed and also there is internal rotation of the shoulder. So this again impinges the rotator cuff muscles and also the subacromial bursa below the acromion. So this is another modified Neer sign. Then we have the Neer impingement test. So sometimes we just confuse between the test and the sign. So what is the test? That is the local anesthetic. When you inject the local anesthetic into the subacromial bursa, maybe by an ultrasound, and then the pain which is reduced. So once you have injected the local anesthetic, the pain of Neer impingement sign will go away. So then this is said that Neer impingement test. When will you get it positive? When there is a rotator cuff impingement or a rotator cuff tear. Then we have the another impingement test, which also you should be knowing. It can be a viva question. Hawkins impingement reinforcement test. So what you do is that forward flex to 90 degrees with forearm parallel to the floor. So as is seen in the picture, and then the examiner passively internally rotates the shoulder while keeping the arm in forward flex position. So again, this Hawkins impingement reinforcement test also has similar principle, that it drives the greater trochanter and the associated rotator cuff into the acromion and the coracoacromial ligament. So this is another test which everybody should be aware of. Then we do the drop arm test. It's a very important test. This can be quickly done. So what you do, you gently abduct the patient's shoulder to maximum degree possible, and then you release the patient's arm and ask him to slowly lower the arm back to the side. Now, if the patient is able to do it, then it means that the rotator cuff is intact and we don't have any pathology in the rotator cuff, and deltoid also. So these two muscles can be tested, and if it is positive, then it implies that your able patient then loses the control of the arm and it suddenly drops to the side. So this is the drop arm test. So he's not able to control the downward motion of the arm. So this is again, clinical implication is important. Large rotator cuff tear, you will get a drop arm test positive. You can quickly do it, and then maybe plan him for an intervention, or you can, if it's a large rotator cuff tear, you might want to send him to the surgery. So these tests are very important because these will help you with your, like, so many things you will be able to rule out in the examination if you've done a detailed shoulder examination. And then when you have an ultrasound with you, that will be your the fourth eye. So then what happens is that MRI, you don't need to go for an MRI, and so many things you will be able to easily see in a good clinical examination and ultrasound. And another important thing here is that axillary nerve involvement will also give you a drop arm test. Then what is the dropping sign or the external rotation lag sign? So now we are talking about the rotator cuff muscles, and we have now come to the infraspinatus muscle. So we know that the rotator cuff has four muscles, and the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis. So these three, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor, they are attached to the greater tuberosity, just lateral to the bicipital groove. And subscapularis comes from the front and attaches to the lesser tuberosity. So now this anatomy should be very clear, because this will aid you in actually knowing the action of the muscle also. And so the tests will also become very easy. They become clinically relevant. So we know that external rotation is the action of infraspinatus muscle. So what we do in this test is you externally rotate the arm to maximum external rotation. And then the patient is asked to maintain this arm position as the examiner releases the arm. Now, if the patient is unable to control it there, unable to hold it there, it drifts to the neutral position. And it implies that there is a significant damage to the infraspinatus tendon and the accompanying muscle atrophy. So like this, like that in this picture also, you're able to see that he has taken it to the maximum external rotation, and then it was positive. That's why it come to the neutral position. So this is positive in the case of tearing or fatty degeneration of infraspinatus muscle. So this test is why is it important to do? One thing is, if there is a lot of fatty degeneration of the infraspinatus muscle, again, if you're sending him for a surgical review, it won't be a very good idea to go for him to go for a surgery. So because there is so much of fatty degeneration, so that is why we should know these things, that we do this test as well. So we have tried to isolate the infraspinatus in that, and now we are trying to isolate the teres minor. So for teres minor, we should be knowing this Hornblower sign, and this is also very easily you can do it in the busy OPD. So infraspinatus is very simple, NEERS was very simple. Then we had then we are having this Hornblower sign and drop arm test. So these four tests, you can actually localize the muscle of the rotator cuff, and you're able to also gauge to some extent the amount of tear also. Like in drop arm, if there is a large rotator cuff tear, you get a drop arm sign test positive. So in Hornblower, what you have to do is, like in the picture, you passively flex the shoulder, and the elbow is also flexed to 90 degrees. Now the patient is asked to maintain the elbow perpendicular to the ground, like in this picture. So if your teres minor is normal, if it is within normal limits, you will be able to do it. But if there is some weakness of the teres minor and there is involvement of teres minor, there is a tear in the teres minor, the hand will come into the forearm will go into internal rotation, like this picture. Okay, so this is like a horn blower, right? You're blowing a horn. So this is also can be a very good question for a quiz, or maybe in the Viva. So teres minor test is horn blower sign. Then, as I already discussed, what is the clinical relevance of these two tests in which you are trying to isolate the infraspinatus and the teres minor? So, chronic tears lead to fatty degeneration, and there will be positive finding in the test. And therefore, it is helpful in determining which patients may benefit from operative intervention. Patients with fatty degeneration will have a very bad prognosis with tendon repair. So, you might not want to send an old patient having these two tests positive for a rotator cuff repair. And if there is a suprascapular nerve palsy, so here again, you will get an abnormal dropping sign in absence of infraspinatus tear. This can be, so here also we should know that if the suprascapular nerve is involved, you will get both the supraspinatus and infraspinatus muscles affected. So you will get both the tests positive. For supraspinatus, we will discuss, you have the empty can and the full can test and the Job's test. And for infraspinatus, we discussed about the dropping sign. So in suprascapular notch, if it is involved. If it is involved in the spinoglenoid notch, again, important thing is that only the infraspinatus tests you will get positive. So you can easily correlate this clinically. And if you have an ultrasound, this adds to the pudding, right? It is a topping for you. So what is the Gerber lift-off test? Sorry. So Gerber lift-off test, we all know about it. It's we do it in our busy OPDs and it's easily done. So you internally rotate the arm behind the back to the mid-lumbar region and dorsum rests on the back. Then you ask the patient to lift the hand off the back. So this was devised by Gerber and it is the Gerber lift-off test. Now here also we have one suprascapularis lag sign. So the examiner puts the arm into position of maximum internal rotation. Arm is then released. And so here you can see if it is positive, the arm drifts back to the lower lumbar spine. So there is weakness of the subscapularis then. And if it is negative, he'll be able to hold it in this maximum internal rotation away from the lumbar spine. So once you do the lift off test, you should also check you can do the lag sign also, just to see if the subscapularis is intact or not, and how much amount of tear is there, what is it very weak. So the muscle testing can also be done in this way only, and this also tests for the subscapularis tears, a partial or a complete tear. To some extent you will be able to gauge it with your clinical examination only. So it is as specific and more sensitive than the lift off test. So lag sign is more sensitive. Specificity is same. Now, we have more subscapularis tests as well. Belly press test can be easily done in the OPD. You place the patient's palm against the abdomen with the arm in coronal plane and elbow is flexed to 90 degrees. Examiner's hand is placed between the patient's hand and the abdomen. In this picture, he is not putting his hand, but the proper description of the test says that the hand has to be placed between the hand and the abdomen, and the strength of subsequent pressure can then be felt. So in case of subscapularis weakness, pressure will be weak and elbow will move forward from the coronal plane. So this elbow will also move forward because subscapularis is weak. So again, this is another test which you can do. The passive rotation test. So this is the passive rotation test, and what the examiner is doing? He's placed his right hand on the shoulder, and with the other hand, he's internally and externally rotating the arm, which is flexed to 90 degrees, abducted to 90 degrees. And what is the clinical relevance? So you will hear a popping sound or a soft tissue crepitus in case of a hypertrophied subacromial bursa or torn and irregular rotator cuff. So this is another test which you can do. Now, so just to summarize the rotator cuff tests, what all did we do? So first one was the drop arm test, in which you were able to locate large rotator cuff tears. Easily you can do it. Then you go for the supraspine, go for the impingement sign, right? With impingement, you're able to rule out the impingement if there is any impingement syndrome. This also localizes the subcoracoid impingement. So subacromial and subcoracoid impingement, in both the cases, you will get the impingement sign positive. Then you can go for the locating the different rotator cuff muscles. You go for the supraspinatus test, which is empty can and full can test. We'll talk about it. I've kept it for some later part of the presentation. And then we have the infraspinatus tests, the dropping sign, then the teres minor, the hornblower sign, and then we came to the subscapularis tests. We had the belly press test, then we had the lift off test and the lag subscapularis lag sign, and then we came to the yes. So these were the broadly the all the rotator cuff and the impingement tests, which we can quickly do. Then you come to the AC joint. AC joint is also easily palpation only you get to know that AC joint is involved or not. And the name of the test is passive cross chest adduction test, or also known as the scarf test. So examiner places the patient's arm into maximum cross chest adduction, and this will, with the other hand, you lightly palpate the patient's AC joint. So both the hands are involved, and what you get is that it reproduces pain in case of AC joint injury or arthritis, AC joint arthritis. Now, so now we come to the SLAP lesions. We have talked about rotator cuff, we have talked about AC joint. Now we are going inside, and we have come to the superior labrum anterior to posterior lesion. So we all do it in the OPD. We do the O'Brien test. It is also known as the active compression test. So you forward flex the shoulder to 90 degrees with the elbow extended, then bring the arm in additional 15 degrees towards the midline, and you maximally internally rotate the shoulder. So the thumb is pointing down, and the patient is asked to resist the downward force, and shoulder is, yeah. So then the next part of the test is that the shoulder is externally rotated so that the palm is up and the procedure is repeated. So with this, you are able to differentiate between a SLAP lesion and an AC joint lesion. So most important thing which you have to see is whether the patient has pain and what is the location of the pain. So if the pain which is produced due to the test, if the test is positive and you get pain on top of the shoulder, it is AC joint involvement. And if the pain is sensed deep in the shoulder, it is a glenoid labrum injury. Mostly, it might be a SLAP lesion. So, important thing is the patient experiences pain during the thumbs down portion of the test. There will be improvement or absence of pain in the thumbs up position. So this is important point, and you can locate the SLAP lesion with this. Then if you have to check for the presence of any instability, right? How will you do this? Superior labral injury in presence of any, I want to remove this, sorry. Yeah. So superior labral lesion in presence of anterior instability, you do the biceps load test. So this you should not be doing in every case. Maybe once the O'Brien test is positive and you have located that it is a SLAP lesion, you might want to see whether there is any instability, especially in a case of a thrower, a throwing athlete, because for them stability is very important. So labrum constitutes a very important component which provides the stability. And if there is a SLAP lesion, there might be presence of any anterior instability associated with it. So, and if this has a very important clinical implication, because you might think on the back of your mind, if it is a throwing athlete, he might need surgery referral if there is some instability associated with it, especially like a gymnast or a like a volleyball thrower, in which the action of shoulder, the stability of shoulder is so important. So how you will do a biceps load test, just like in the picture, a patient is supine, arm is in the apprehension position of abduction and external rotation. So the anterior apprehension, how you check that, you put the arm in that position, and patient when feels, he will start feeling apprehensive if there is some anterior instability associated. Then the elbow is flexed to 90 degrees and forearm is supinated. So you see here that elbow is flexed and forearm is supinated, and patient is asked to flex the elbow against resistance. So you are again putting biceps into load, and simultaneously you are also checking for the anterior instability. So this is an important test if there is a slap lesion. Then now we go on to our third part, which is the stability testing. So in case of a slap lesion, or maybe the patient, if he's giving history that he had some subluxations, he had the shoulder coming out, he had the shoulder popping out of the head, the glenoid, and that might be the case in so many boxers or in so many wrestlers, especially because wrestling is a contact sport. So in such cases, you definitely need to check for the stability test. And what are the goals of our stability testing? So two goals. You are going to see the presence and the direction of instability. So there can be four types of instability. It can be an anterior instability, it can be a posterior instability, it can be an inferior instability, or it can be a multi-directional instability, right? So these four things you have to now rule out. And then you have to also quantitate the amount of laxity present. Now, here again, we have two concepts, stability and laxity. So, laxity in a patient will not always uh, corroborate with instability. So, in a patient, he might have a lax shoulder, but he might not have an unstable shoulder, because that is why here I would also emphasize the importance of checking the Baton score. So you check for the laxity, the generalized laxity as well in such cases, because if the Baton score it is like around 8/9 or 9/9, that means he's having a hyperlaxity syndrome, and that then in those cases the shoulder becomes more prone to becoming unstable. So that is why it's not that all the lax shoulders will be unstable, and all the unstable shoulders might not be lax as well. So both these things need to be distinguished. Now, how do you do the provocative tests? So first we'll talk about the instability tests, and then we'll also talk about the laxity tests. So how do you do the anterior apprehension test, which is known as the crank test? Now, this is in this picture they are showing it in an upright position, but it is best done with the patient lying down, because the scapula is then supported on the bed, right? So examiner, after you have made the patient lie supine, the examiner places the patient's shoulder in 90 degree of abduction and slight extension with elbow flexed. So these two things are important. You put it in abduction while he's lying down, and extension. So this is the apprehension position. And then examiner externally rotates the arm. So you are externally rotating the arm and further abducts and extends. So three movements are happening on the shoulder: abduction, extension, and external rotation. Now, if the anterior laxity, if the anterior instability is there, the patient will have anxiety and he will prevent you from doing this maneuver. So then you will stop there. Okay. So this is the test for anterior instability. Then you do the relocation test if it is positive. And this is to increase the specificity of the apprehension test. Only if you get the apprehension test positive, you do the relocation test, in which the patient's arm is placed in the apprehension position. So this is the apprehension position of abduction, external rotation, and extension. And then examiner applies the posteriorly directed force on the anterior shoulder with the examiner's free hand. So this reduces or resolves the patient's apprehension and pain. And so this confirms the symptomatic anterior instability. If there is anterior instability in case of an athlete, a surgical referral definitely needs. Okay, then you come now. This is an important concept. So we all know about external impingement. We talk about it. We also talked about the impingement sign and the impingement test. we also should be knowing what is internal impingement. This is very important in case of a throwing athlete in the cocking phase. So there are phases of, sorry. So there are phases of throwing in a thrower's shoulder that you all should know. Now, in the cocking phase, what happens is can produce the cocking phase, you do the abduction and external rotation. So that is the apprehension position. You do that, and if there is internal impingement, what will happen is patient will have pain. He will not have apprehension. So this is how you differentiate once you between the anterior apprehension test and the internal impingement if it is there. So you abduct, external rotate the shoulder, and this will cause the rotator cuff to be to glide against the posterior lip of the glenoid, right behind. That means that that athlete has an internal impingement, and this test is positive. In his case also, both the apprehension and relocation tests will be positive, but they will have pain. So this is the difference between apprehension test and how you locate the internal impingement test. This is important. Then only you will, if we know about it, if we try to locate it, then we will have our rehabilitation plan according to it. So again, now I'm coming to I talked about the anterior instability, then we talked about internal impingement, and now we are talking about anterior and posterior laxity. So how you check the anterior and posterior laxity is arm is hanging loosely by the side, examiner from behind grabs the patient's scapula and with the examiner's left hand. So the index finger will be on the coracoid process, here you can see, and the thumb will be on the scapular spine, and you grasp the humeral head between the thumb and the fingers of the right hand, and you try to translate it. So this is like the anterior draw test. You do it in the like the Latchman test, you do it for the ACL. So in this also, similar to it, you just hold it and you translate it, and you try to quantitate the amount of translation you sense. And the important point is that you should compare it with the normal shoulder. Uh, then only you will be, because so in so many lax patients, you might get this positive, right? So comparison with the normal shoulder is important, and knowing how much amount of laxity is there is also important. So normal, what is the normal? Posterior laxity is more than the anterior laxity. So you should know the normal, then only we'll be able to appreciate the abnormal. So anteriorly, approximately 25% of width of glenoid, and posteriorly about 50% of width of glenoid. This much can be covered in translation. So this is normal, 25% and 50%. But if more than this is there, this means that the shoulder is lax. And you can know whether it is posteriorly lax or whether it is anteriorly lax. And similar correlating with it, you can actually give them the rehabilitation plan, focusing more on the posterior stabilizers or the anterior stabilizers. And so that is why it is important to know. Now, the third laxity is the inferior laxity. So what you do, we check this sulcus sign in so many of the stroke patients also we see it. But in a shoulder laxity patient, how you will see? So you with the arm by the side of the body, with the other hand, with the examiner's both the hands, you're trying to pull the humerus down, and with your eyes just below the acromion, what you see is that there is a sulcus which has formed. So in case of inferior laxity, you will see a sulcus sign. What is a multidirectional instability? This is an important concept. So humeral head can be dislocated or subluxed in more than one direction. Mostly, what is the combination which you get? It is the inferior instability combined with instability in at least one other direction. So you will get either inferior plus anterior or inferior plus posterior. signs of ligamentous laxity would be there in some patient, as we already discussed. So in a patient of having a Baton score of 9 by 9 is more likely to have a multidirectional instability in the shoulder as well. Now coming to the last part of our instability, which is the posterior instability. So how you do the jerk test. So this is the jerk test. As you see in the picture, shoulder is forward flexed to 90 degrees with elbow flexed, and posteriorly directed force is put at the elbow to push the humeral head out back from the glenoid fossa. So from here, the pressure is applied, and what you will feel is a jerk or a jump when the humeral head dislocates out of the glenoid posteriorly. So again, this test is easy to conduct. In case of an instability, in case you find the history and examination such, you can easily quickly do the anterior apprehension test, the laxity tests, the translation test, and the jerk test, and the sulcus test. So these 4 tests quickly you can do. Another thing is the circumduction test, in which you are seeing in this picture, the examiner with his left hand has held the scapula, and with the right hand he's taken the forearm of the patient to slight extension and 30 degrees of abduction. So extension and abduction, and then he circumducts the shoulder. So he's completing the entire circle, and in this position, in adduction and flexion position, this is the position of maximum posterior provocation. So in this case, he will feel in when the arm comes in this position, forward flexion and adduction position, then he will feel the apprehension in case of a posterior instability. So this is the second test for posterior instability. Now we come to so we have talked about rotator cuff, we have talked about AC joint, we talked about slap lesions, and then we talked about the instability tests and the laxity, and we talked about the internal impingement concept. Now we are coming to the biceps tendon. So these are the easy tests. We know about them. We'll quickly revise. So speed test, it is the most sensitive provoking biceps, most sensitive test, and it provokes the biceps tendon pain. Easily done. You take the arm to 90 degree of forward flexion, and you press against, you give resistance against in the downward direction, and there will be pain if it is positive. It aids in evaluation of the biceps lesion, but it is not a diagnostics test. So if the speed test comes out to be positive, you cannot say that the patient definitely has has a biceps lesion. You need to do another test to confirm it, which is more diagnostic, which is more specific. So what is the more specific test? We all know about it. It is the Yergason test. So how you do it? You flex the elbow to 90 degree. Forearm is pronated. You grasp the patient's hand and ask the patient to simultaneously flex and supinate. So what he's doing, he's also flexing and he's also supinating. So both the actions of the biceps are done simultaneously, and the examiner resists this action. If this is positive, Yergason is positive. This means biceps might have some involvement. There might be a small tear, there might be tenosynovitis, there might be some subluxation of the biceps. So then you need to further do some tests to see what is it. Now, here again, the biceps instability test, if in case you feel that there is instability of the biceps tendon. So this is again very important, because in so many times when you're doing the ultrasound, you get the subluxation of the biceps tendon, and it is associated so commonly with a subscapularis tear, right? If there is a subscapularis tear, you might also have a biceps tendon being subluxed. So how do you test it clinically? So you can just do it in OPD and then maybe confirm on the ultrasound. So instability, you basically take the arm to 90 degree of abduction. You have also with one hand you are palpating the groove of the biceps tendon, and with the other hand, you are internally and externally rotating the arm, the shoulder, sorry, right? The shoulder is internally and externally rotated. So this is how, and you might also remember that when we do an ultrasound, this is how we also see the bicep subluxation, right? You internally and externally rotate the shoulder. So this test also is important, one important test. Now, so here most of the presentation is done. So I have covered rotator cuff, I've covered the AC joint, then we talked about the slap lesion, then we talked about instability and laxity, impingement, then biceps. Another point which I'll just quickly share is that you should also be doing the thoracic outlet syndrome tests. I'll quickly enumerate them and you can go through them because the presentation was becoming long. I didn't want to make it so boring, so I have omitted it. So you should be knowing about the Roos test, about the Adson test, about the Halsted test, and the hyperabduction test. So these four tests are there for ruling out the thoracic outlet syndrome, which also commonly presents as a shoulder pain. So now one question for the audience. So I'm done with my presentation. I want to know from the audience what is the difference between an empty can and a full can test?
Empty can is thumb upward and
Yeah. Thumb upward is
thumb downward is empty can and full can is
right.
upward.
Can you tell me the significance of both? Why you do it? Why can't you do just one?
Don't know.
Anybody can think about it. Empty can and full can. So,
Ma'am, empty
yeah.
can will do full internal rotation and it will it will be more painful. It will provoke pain. While
Yeah,
full
right.
can is thumbs up position, so
Mhm.
there is still almost 45-degree external rotation. So that is
Mhm.
less painful and more like
Hmm. Okay. So,
full
this
can is
is
thumbs up.
So point is correct that, but I've still haven't got my question answer. What is the main difference? You are right that empty can will be more painful because you are actually also causing impingement in this. So in internal rotation, the rotator cuff is again getting impinged. But which test will you do first? So as you said, it is empty can is more painful, so you'll do it after the full can test.
Yes,
But
ma'am. Full can will be done first as it is
hmm,
less provocative and
hmm.
there will be impingement, lesser pain to the patient, and
Hmm. So, right. So these are important points, but one point which still hasn't been talked about is that full can test is specific for supraspinatus. Okay, so if you want to test for supraspinatus power, or you want to see if supraspinatus isolating the supraspinatus, then you do the full can test. So full can test, you do, get to know that yes, supraspinatus is might be there might be a partial tear, there might be some weakness of the supraspinatus if there is the suprascapular nerve. So you have located that supraspinatus is the cause, and then empty can is more of impingement test. It will also be positive in case of an impingement. It will also be positive in case of a supraspinatus. So specific for supraspinatus is full can test. So that was the answer. Okay. So I am done with my presentation, and I kept this space for some questions
Yeah,
because I'm
thank you,
sure.
ma'am, for your wonderful presentation. Just I want to add something to your presentation. Like someone sitting in a busy OPD, getting a patient with shoulder pain. I was just attending a class of Dr. Maheshwari, who has written orthopedics book. He has divided the clinical examination shoulder into three tiers. The first tier, second tier, and third tier. The first trial, how do you eliminate in a BGOPD is that yes, this is a glenohumeral joint, this is a subacromial joint, or it is AC joint, right? So initially, patient present with the shoulder pain in OPD, just see if the patient is having a adequate amount of external rotation is there or not. If the external rotation is adequate, probably the glenohumeral joint is normal. I mean, there is no definite pathology in the glenohumeral joint. Then you go to the second tier, that is the subacromial impingement. That's in that area pathology you will find the more amount of internal rotation will be painful. And if there is a subacromial bursal pathology or is originating from the cuff pathology, they also behave a different way. If there is a bursal pathology is there, so you can have a test like just axial compression and rotation. The bursa will be compressed and the patient will have pain. And if it is a subacromial site cuff pathology is there, then you will have classical Niels impingement test or Hawkins-Kennedy's test that will be positive. So that way you can differentiate whether it is a glenohumeral or it is a subacromial space impingement. The third tier is the acromioclavicular joint. If both the things are normal, then you go for a cross adduction test and palpate the superficial AC joint. You can also differentiate that. So painful shoulder joint, just to quickly evaluate is a glenohumeral or it is a subacromial or it is a AC joint. It's a quickly one can expect that might be this is the site of pathology. Sometimes confuses in initial stages they present with the subacromial impingement, lateral superadded with the glenohumeral pathology. That times you might confuse and you may get a mixed picture. Otherwise, this is how one can differentiate glenohumeral, subacromial space, and SC joint pathology. Now we can take questions. Dr. Arun, can you assist me because I am
Yes,
badly
sir.
affected with my pharynx. So can you
Yes,
take
sir.
up the questions?
There are few questions, sir. I'll ma'am, there is one question. What's the clinical test for recurrent shoulder dislocation? Since the patient came with a dislocation, if we tried ROM dislocation happens, so what we could do clinical test?
So when the patient is coming to you with a history of recurrent shoulder dislocation, so he will mainly give you, are you talking about an acute scenario or are you talking about, he has mentioned in the message that is it a dislocated shoulder or is it a patient with history of recurrent dislocations?
The first question is like, what's the clinical test for recurrent shoulder dislocation, ma'am? And the following part of the question is, since the patient already came with a dislocation, if we tried ROM dislocation, so what clinical tests can we do?
Okay, I got it. So, if the patient is coming to you with a dislocation, it is an emergency, right? You don't have to do any test. You have to quickly relocate that shoulder first. Okay. So, but if the patient is coming to you, so many times patient would come कि कंधा उतर जाता है and मेरा 2 बार उतरा 3 बार उतरा. So that in that case you will do the provocative tests. So we talked about the provocative tests. We talked about anterior provocative test. You have to ask him आगे से निकलता है पीछे से. Maybe he won't be able to tell you. So maybe he would be able to tell you. So in that case, you do the anterior apprehension test as we talked about it, the abduction, external rotation, and extension. You take him in the supine position and you put pressure. You do this provocative test and he will have apprehension. He will be uncomfortable if there is anterior apprehension. If it is positive, you do the relocation test, you put it back and he will feel better. So that means that there was anterior instability. Then if you have a posterior instability, if he says पीछे से निकलता है, then it is the jerk test. You make him lie down and you put the arm in 90 degree of abduction with the forearm in 90 degree of flexion and you give a posteriorly directed force. So that is the jerk test, which we talked about. The second test was the circumduction test. So this is also a posterior apprehension test. So these are the main instabilities which you might get in a case of recurrent shoulder dislocation. You can also get a multi-directional instability. As we said, there would be two directions, at least two directions involved. So there might be anterior, inferior is always there, anterior with inferior, or posterior with inferior, or all three. So that also you can try to distinguish. And inferior, we talked about it, sulcus sign. And circumduction test is also there for posterior instability. Then we have the laxity tests. So Baton score you should do in any case of recurrent dislocation. You should do Baton score. You should check for generalized laxity, and you should do that translation test for checking the translation. So this is how you will go ahead with the instability tests.
Yeah, instability, posterior instabilities are very uncommon. Most common instability is anterior instability.
Yes.
Posterior instability occurs because of convulsion or electric shock, like where there is violent contraction of the muscles will be there. That time we'll expect a posterior dislocation. Otherwise, posterior dislocation are part of the global instability. I mean, with hyperlaxity syndromes, they present the posterior instability. Per se, posterior instability, recurrent instability, very uncommon, very, very extremely uncommon. Except a global, this laxity syndromes is not associated.
Yes. But
Uh,
in contact sports, we can get any because they hit you so hard. So that
Yes,
is one other exception. A wrestler coming to you with a dislocated, then you can get any. But yes, as sir said, anterior will be the most common.
Ma'am, what is the treatment for recurrent shoulder dislocation when the patient comes without dislocation? Like,
Mhm. So then mostly you have to ask if how many dislocations have been there. If it is more than two or three dislocations and he's an active athlete, he's somebody like a thrower, a throwing athlete, or maybe a gymnast who has to do a headstand, or who has to actually do so much of active movements, then he has to go for surgery. Then they decide depending on what type of lesion it is, and they do a Bankart repair, or so that is for a surgical intervention. But if it is less than two and it's not a very not an active athlete, then you can go for a good rehabilitation plan in which you focus on the stabilizers of the shoulder. You focus on the scapular stabilizers and the rotator cuff muscles and the anterior stabilizers, and that is how you go ahead. And we also have so many good protocols for instability. Like there is a very good that is done subsequently once the shoulder is slightly stable, Derby instability rehabilitation program. You all can go through it. It can be given to somebody who is not an athlete and who is an old patient coming to you with uh, two or less than two dislocations. Then you can go for that.
how to differentiate partial and full thickness supraspinatus tear?
So partial and full thickness.
Yes.
First, you have done the full can test. So full can test, you will not be able to completely say whether it is partial of or complete tear, but yes, a few tests you can be quite close to your diagnosis. So if full can test is positive, you can localize that yes, supraspinatus is involved. There might be a partial tear. Full tear it won't be, because it depends on the muscle charting what you're getting. If you're getting 3/5 on a full can test, that means that okay, it might be a partial tear. If you're getting, if he's not able to do it only, it's a full can, it's a complete tear. Then again, drop arm test was important. So drop arm test, it will point towards a full thickness tear. But it might be that supraspinatus other rotator cuff muscles are also involved. So you have to do one supraspinatus specific test and one broad test, and you also have to gauge the muscle power in that. So you do the MRC, how we do it for different group of muscles, and you should just know how to check for supraspinatus solely, how to check for infraspinatus solely, how to check for teres minor. We talked about it in the presentation also, and that is how you will be able to quite a few quite demarcate whether it is a partial tear or a full thickness tear.
Next question. Any clinical test we can differentiate between short head and long head of biceps?
So mostly the tests which we have are for long head of biceps. So for short head of biceps, I haven't come across any test. All these tests which we talked about, they were for they specifically tell in the text that this is for long head of biceps. So if you want to see the short head, then I think you will have to go for some investigation.
Yes. The next question, ma'am. What is the rehabilitation protocol for patient with Beighton score 5 by 9, more than 5 by 9?
So 5 by 9, are you talking about a shoulder case, or he's talking about a generalized?
Actually, it's not mentioned, ma'am.
It's not mentioned. Okay. So we can talk about both. If the Beighton score is more than 5 by 9, he has a generalized laxity. You have to focus more on strength of all the joints, around all the joints. So you will tell the patient that do not focus more on stretching exercises, because already the joints are so lax. Now he has to focus more on stability of the joints, or more on the strength around the joints. So you will give a good strengthening program to that patient, and you will tell them that yes, you are more prone to injuries and you should be putting these exercises in your daily routine. So that all those things you have to make it clear to the patient. And if it is a shoulder coming with some laxity, then you have to give a good shoulder rehab program, in which you will, again, as I told you, you will cover all the aspects. You will cover the strength, you will cover the rotator cuff strength, you will cover the scapula strength. So scapular strengthening exercises are again very important. So you start with isometrics, then you go to the specific scapular stabilizer strengthening exercises, like we have the push-up plus program, in which you basically do push-ups with your scapular muscles. So there is a progression for that, in which you do first against the wall, then you go take the patient to the table, then you take him to the floor. So that is how the push-up plus program for scapula is. Then you also give him the rotator cuff strengthening exercises, which we do usually. So do a graded one. So you tell him about all the TheraBands, about the colors of TheraBands, how you grade it: yellow, green, blue, black, gray. And so he will be changing the TheraBand colors every weekly interval. And then you also tell them about the scapular exercises of YWT. So YWT you have to do with start with half kg, 1 kg, 2 kg. So like that you will keep increasing the weights. And after TheraBand he will go to weights also, the pulley weight, sorry, the dumbbell weights. And then you also focus on the balance and proprioceptive exercises, in which which are very nicely depicted in Derby instability program. If you can after the class maybe go through that program. It has specific exercises for balance and proprioception, and other parts also are included in it. So you covered the scapula, the rotator cuff, and the balance and proprioception, and this is how you give a rehab program.
Okay. Ma'am, another question. Is PRP useful for partial supraspinatus tear?
Yes, in my experience, so many of the partial supraspinatus tears have healed with just a PRP injection, even one or maybe two injections. But yes, it's quite useful. But again, it depends on the bursal sided tears, or is it whether it is a. It will depend on the length of the tear. It will also depend on the site of the tear. So whether it is articular sided or whether it is bursal sided. So it's slightly different, better in case of a bursal sided tear in my experience. But yes, partial articular sided tears, also known as pasta lesions, they are also quite, if it is a small lesion, in that case also there are very good results which I have got. So you can go ahead with that.
So for pasta lesion, do you inject the PRP into the joint because intraarticular? So the intraarticular fluid, synovial fluid will be there. That will decrease the concentration of the PRP. So is
No,
it
no.
really?
In partial articular-sided, we locate the articular-sided tear. It's usually on the footprint, and you basically go into that. You locate the lesion, and we put it there. If it is a bigger lesion, it easily goes. If it is a very small lesion, it's very difficult that it will go. Then we do some fenestration, and we try to inject as much as possible. Otherwise, it will not go there.
Is
If we
it
put it in
USG
the
guided?
bursa. Yes.
USG guided or Scopy guided?
No, no,
Uh,
USG guided. With
intraarticular
USG.
tears?
USG guided.
Okay.
For the, yeah, I'm talking about the articular sided tear in which
Yes.
so in that easily it is visible with the ultrasound, and you can locate it. The only thing is only if it is a bigger tear, it will easily go. Smaller tear, it's fenestration has to be done, and then you are able to inject some bit of it. Rest, I just put it on the bursa, but I still have got good results. With that also, I agree that it will go into the synovial fluid, but the part which has gone into the tear, that heals to some extent the tear.
What is your experience on this management of scapular dyskinesia for recurrent shoulder dislocation?
Yes. So I didn't cover scapular dyskinesia here, but it was a very important concept because we should know the grades of scapular dyskinesia. And so definitely, once a shoulder patient comes, scapular dyskinesia has to be ruled out. And so many patients, it's only scapular dyskinesia which is causing the pain. So then we need to stabilize the scapula, and we need to go for a good rehab program for the scapula.
We need one more class on this, exactly how demonstration of different types of exercise programs, especially when the patient presents multidirectional instability where surgeries are not in result of surgery are not encourageable. So that time rehab is the only way of solving the issues. So we want one more class on how to do all these exercise programs to manage global instability around shoulder joint.
Okay, sir. We can take one more class.
Last question probably.
Yes, sir.
Arun?
For patients doing gym exercises, which workouts have to be avoided in rotator cuff tears, biceps injuries, and labral injuries?
So, it will depend on the stage of the tear. So, if the patient has come to you in acute case, all these things we can talk about it like separately. Slap lesion will be slightly more severe in intensity, but biceps lesion and then so I would grade it like rotator cuff. First is rotator cuff, then biceps, and then slap lesion. In simple rotator cuff injuries, partial tears after you have injected the PRP, or if you're not injecting the PRP, definitely you start with, we talked about it. So, and we all know about it also. I'll quickly just say it again. Isometrics, you start, then you go for the TheraBand, and you also do the scapula exercises, and then you go for the gym-based free weight exercises. So, if he's a gym goer and he's coming to you with a shoulder pain, don't stop his gym because it's just a shoulder injury. You tell him to do the cross training. Cross training is an important concept for an athlete because so many patients, shoulder injury comes to you, you say take rest, and the athlete, if he has taken a rest of 1 week, it's going to cost him too much. So his body will be deconditioned, all the muscles, his aerobic power, his endurance will go away. So shoulder patient, don't stop his other exercises if he's an active gym goer. Okay, so you can tell him do cycling, do the aerobic exercises, aerobic conditioning exercises. So if he's doing cycling or a cross trainer, he can continue doing it. He can continue doing um, some bit of swimming if he is doing. Okay, not complete motion of the hand, but he can do if he's a swimmer. So I mean to say, you have to take out means how he can continue doing his aerobic conditioning. Don't stop his aerobic conditioning, and don't stop his leg strengthening. Okay, so he will do the leg press, he will do all the gym leg exercises, he will do the strengthening of the other shoulder also. So this is the importance of cross training. Importance of core strengthening, we all know. Core you will not stop. Okay, core is so important. So he will continue doing core. Only thing you will stop is his shoulder exercises, in which you will not stop the exercises. You will give him a graded rehabilitation program, in which isometrics followed by isotoning followed by eccentric exercises will be given. So isometric we know, isotonic we know, and then we have the throwers program. So throwers program is also one important concept for shoulder pains, because it has all the important, you can, after the class you can go through the throwers 11 program. It's a very good program which incorporates eccentric strengthening of the rotator cuff muscles. It also has components of scapula stabilizer in it. So this is how you will give him. And in labral pathologies, the rehab goes slightly slower. And as I told you, so but in rotator cuff, you can easily go ahead. That's it. Otherwise,
Okay, so we have to wind up. Just one request that most of us, when we get a patient of shoulder pathology, maybe it is instability, maybe it's a painful shoulder, many times you refer the patient to a therapy department for therapy or rehab purpose. But what is that exact rehab? That what should be done? How, what are the muscle to be strengthened? How to strengthen all this group of muscles? So we need one more class on this, on practical based with a pictorial diagram, that what are the different schedule program for different pathological conditions around the shoulder joint. That need to be, I mean, all physiatrists must know about that. Instead of referring all the patient to therapy department, we should do ourselves that what are the minimum exercise program and should advise to the patient that we must learn. So
yes.
we can have one more class in future regarding that.
Sure, sir. I would like to give, I will take the class, but I would like to give one advice to all the physiatrists, maybe the residents mainly, that you should not refer to the therapy, that just do the therapy of the patient. Give them charts. Okay. So you take out, like I told you, throwers program. There are so many named good programs, especially for shoulder and also for knee and other parts of the muscles, other parts of the body. So you take out those programs, you keep them with you yourself, you go through them also, you give them charts. You what in your prescription, the exercise prescription should be very exact. It should have all the components of exercise, the type of exercise, the group of muscles which you are including, the intensity, the frequency, the mode. So all these things are important components of exercise prescription. You should try to include those, and also give them the charts, and then write the names of the exercises in the what are there in the chart, and then you send to the rehab, to the physiotherapist. Okay, and just so all these exercises should be demonstrated by the physiotherapist, and you should be telling the patient what all exercises are to be done. That can only be done if we know what exercises are to be done. So
Yes,
that is
yes.
why everybody, once you're reading shoulder, please also read these programs. Rest, I will also take one class, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, exactly that that I want that. Actually, we must know that what is the exact type of exercise one need to know. Instead of sending all the patient to therapy department, we must know the what's type of exercise, which muscle to be strengthened in which condition, and what is the exact protocol for that. This need to be discussed once in the webinar. So we'll invite you once again for this shoulder rehab program, special exercise programs. Right.
Sure, sir, sure.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I must thank also to all participants for participating in this webinar. And I must thank my colleague of our state association as well as the Indian Association of PMR for helping us in organizing this webinar on monthly basis. Thank you, ma'am, once again for accepting our invitation and presenting a wonderful talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.